Thank you, Lloyd, and more importantly, thank you to you and your staff and AICA for just all the opportunity to have this discussion here today. And the subject of water is always going to be the most important subject for humanity, because without water, you have no food. So you at least have to start with water as a launching pad for those resources that must be in place, and those resources that we can depend on. I think our goal here has always been at the different conferences, at the different COPs, is that we seem to recognize that we can talk all about the weather. We can talk all about what kind of energy we might use. We can talk about a lot of different things. But one of the things that we observed early on was that unpredictable weather means unpredictable harvest. And for all of us that are farmers, and this is a panel of farmers and folks that work within the industry of agriculture, is predictability, resilience. These are all the kinds of building blocks that we need to have a predictable supply of food for the planet. We've always talked about, we can grasp that we have the capacity to feed everybody in the world today. We don't know what it'll be. It's interesting, it's November, the 8 billionth person on the planet is born this month. And so we've reached a new high in population, 8 billion people. We don't know what it'll be by the year 2050. But I think our goal right now is, can we maintain the capacity to feed everybody and then manage the imagination and the will to get it done? Those are two different things, but without the capacity, you'll never get to that point of achieving the sustainable goal number 2, which is to end hunger and nutrition insecurity on the planet. So with that, I know we want to talk very quickly about how different areas use water differently, different crops use the water differently. And the idea that there's a one size fits all is a part of the reason that this panel is here, to think that the solution for water availability, water delivery, water use, water efficiencies is all the same for agriculture. It's absolutely not. And we recognize that if we can at least showcase some of the great things that are taking place within the ag industry, not from the century past, but in this 21st century, that's what gives us hope. I like to use the analogy of, are we looking at a glass half full or a glass half empty? And oftentimes it really depends on what's in the pitcher that you're pouring. If you're pouring from a position of a lot of knowledge, a lot of new technology, a lot of solutions, most of us will all swear that that glass is half full and getting fuller all the time. And the toolbox for achieving some of the capacity building needs of a world are getting better. When the pitcher is full of fear and you're pouring that pitcher, that's a glass half empty. And that's where people start to get a little bit desperate, thinking that we don't have solutions, that we don't have optimism for the future. And I think it's best to try at this conference to basically plant that seed, let it germinate, that there is an exciting future ahead, and agriculture is at the center of that solution set for so many of the things for the achievement of those sustainable development goals. Our group, Solutions from the Land, covers farmers, ranchers, and foresters. We're US based, but at the same time, more importantly, we're producer based. Producers, the stewards of the land, make up the bulk of our group. And we love to know that that voice is the voice that we try to hear from, and let that voice be a guiding principle throughout these type of conferences and throughout these types of discussions on the future of the food supply for global food systems. What I'd like to do right now is introduce very quickly, the bios are available on our site for today. We have Jocelyn Anderson, we have John Farner, we have Brad Doyle, and we have Jerry Hatfield online. One is an almond grower at the end. John works with the most important water filtration and delivery systems delivery companies in the world, Netafim. Brad is a rice producer out of Arkansas. Jocelyn and I are both Californians, and Jerry Hatfield is speaking to us online from Florida. And we're going to kick this off with Jerry giving us an overview of some of the challenges and opportunities with water. So with that, Jerry, why don't you go ahead, and we'll go down the list.
Great. Thank you, AG. And thank you, everybody, for the opportunity to be here. And we do want to talk about water, and particularly water is kind of the face of climate change and all of this. I can get my slides to move forward. Water is one of the most limiting factors to productivity and ecological function. If you think about that, as AG said, is that managing water is probably going to be one of our greatest challenges as we go forward. And we think about the limitations and all of this. We can begin to bring this together. And all I want to do is kind of get you a broad overview this morning of just how all of this fits together. And if you think about the impacts on productivity, and our panelists will talk about this as well, is that we estimate that on average, about 40% of our yield loss or productivity losses are due to deficit water availability in a typical year. And you can look at all of this, and it's not that drought. The drought can reduce the yields by 100% when we get that complete crop failure. We have to realize that when we look at productivity increases, that still that 40% is just due to short-term water deficits. We've done a lot of studies on a number of different crops, both in the US and around the world, that it is not that dynamic of saying that it's just a little bit of impact all the way through. But the other piece, when we always talk about water, is that we always think that it's a deficit problem. But in reality, excess water at the wrong time can be a limitation to productivity as well. I mean, we see flooded fields at the inappropriate time, or being unable to harvest our crops. And so water deficits and water excesses are both seasonally and spatially complex. And we have to realize that it is not a one size fits all. There's a lot of diversity that happens within a year and across different spaces of time as well. And so when we think about this changing dynamic and we think about water, is that in reality, most of our water is really a result of precipitation. What we see is shifting patterns on a global basis. And I'll show you some of the slides there. We'll see changes in seasonality of precipitation. And what I mean by that is that what do we have in changes precipitation in the spring, when we have it during the summer. And then we're also seeing changes in both intensity as well as frequency. How much rain do we get in a particular storm, and what's the length of time between rainstorms and precipitation events that are out there. And so our changing climate relative to water is complex, and you see that both temporally in the seasonality, spatially in terms of intensity and frequency. So all those different pieces are fitting together. And so when we think about this, managing water in ag is going to be our greatest challenge to cope with. We can shift cropping patterns to handle temperature, CO2. Every plants love CO2, but managing water is going to be one of our greatest challenges in terms of being able to optimize how we manage crops and how do we increase that productivity that's necessary to feed that 8th billion person that's going to be born anytime here. And all I want to do in just a couple panels of slides is take just show you what the IPCC has generated in some of the recent ones, looking at changes in here. Anything that's kind of a green color is going to be an increase in precipitation. If it's gray or brown, it's in color, it's going to be a deficit in there. And you can begin to see on a worldwide basis that the projections in annual precipitation in the US, where we're talking about, basically there's not a lot of shift in annuals. We see a little bit of increase in the eastern part. Canada is improving. A lot of cases, and in Africa, we're seeing potential increases in precipitation and all of this. But if we start narrowing this down and not think about just an annual basis, but think about that spring basis, because we often think about the northern hemisphere in terms of spring, you can see that we're seeing a lot of increases, trending increases in terms of precipitation in the spring. It says if that annual really hasn't changed and the spring is increasing, it means that somewhere along that whole year we're going to see a deficit, and we see that in all of the northern Europe, China, and everything else is that what we're seeing is increases in the spring part. It says we often have a lot of cases in which we end up with flooded fields. We disrupt planting that can impact our productivity. But then when we switch that into a July-August period, is that now we begin to see that we're not seeing any change. And so in reality, the Northern Hemisphere, that's what I always tell producers, that July-August rainfall is really where we grow our crops. And when we start seeing deficits in that summer period is when we end up a lot of these yield decreases in part of this. The other thing that we look at is trends in terms of drought across that gets back to this intensity and frequency of not having rainfall at the right time. Just these shaded areas in terms of looking at this is we're seeing a lot more areas in which we can have potential drought in terms of projections as well as trends in terms of drought. So all of these shifting patterns are going to be important. And then we also, at the same time, this is what often confuses a lot of people, is that how can you have a drought and heavy precipitation all in the same models, is that it's that frequency distribution. We can end up with increases in precipitation at very intense times, but then that frequency ends up with causing drought because we'll have a long time between rain events and everything. So if we just think about these projections, just to kind of set the panel up here, is that through mid-century, there's going to be continued change in precipitation amounts and timing. And this is really going to affect all of our agricultural regions around the world. There's a combination of heavy precipitation and agricultural and ecological drought that's going to continue to place constraints on agricultural productivity. That 40% decrease in productivity that we see just due to water deficits is going to continue to be there. So we had to figure out how to manage our water, how to manage our crops. So we really need to be thinking about how we evaluate and implement practices that allow for more efficient capture and utilization of water in crop production, as well as innovative practices. And so that the panel that we have as part of this is we'll talk about some of their practices as part of this as well. So AG, that kind of sets up the panel for you and everything, and now you can go from there.
Thank you, Jerry. I really appreciate that. And as you mentioned, this idea that each region has to deal with their own resilience, each region has to understand that what's taking place in the eastern side of the seaboard is not happening in the drought-stricken areas of California. Too much water, too little water. It's all part of the challenges we face. We were just talking to one of the secretaries from Central America of the Ministries of Agriculture, and she mentioned that their biggest challenge is mini droughts and unusual flooding that takes place, and the fact that the cycles of rain and weather have changed enough that it's causing havoc for the farmers because there's no predictability. This goes back to predictability means then we have to look for new tools. Of our producers here on panel, you're going to find that they have tremendous innovation going on farm. And so let's go ahead and start with Jocelyn Anderson and her operation. No, they know that. So we're going to go back one. And Jocelyn's going to go first.
Hello, my name is Jocelyn Anderson. I'm a fourth generation farmer from Northern California. My family farm is about an hour and a half north of Sacramento. If you're not familiar with Sacramento, it's about 2.5 hours northeast of San Francisco, right in the middle of the island. So I farm almonds and walnuts, and we also operate a walnut cooler. My dad started planting trees back in the early 90s when things started to boom in the late 90s and early 2000s. We already had trees in the shed. A walnut puller is the first step in processing walnuts after you pick them up off the ground and harvest them. It removes the grain of coal that you see and then dries the walnut out afterwards before they're delivered to the final. So in California, we have had a lot of water issues lately, and as farmers, we are just constantly adapting in order to be able to manage what water we do. We are fortunate on my farm that we are on private wells and we haven't had to struggle to receive water from irrigation districts, but around my farm where there is rice, there was none planted this year because no one was allocated any water from their irrigation district. So for my farm personally, we have done a lot with working with the state in order to improve our water efficiency and use. So some of the things that we have done is apply for a SWEET grant, which is the state water efficiency and enhancement program that California has. And we were able to receive funding from the state and match some of that funding to apply solar panels for our water pumps, but also apply VFDs in order to decrease our water use when we're irrigating. We were able to make adjustments in our irrigation where we can water row by row versus full sets at the same time. So that almonds in particular, and also I say almonds instead of almonds often. So if you're wondering what it is, that's how I pronounce it. We're able to water our pollinators and our non-pollinators separately. So after harvest, if our non-pollinators do not need water and we have pollinators still on the tree, we're able to water those in order to save water as well. So we have to make a few adjustments. Some of our wells were grown back in the 1950s, so they are only about 50 feet big. One in particular has started to lose some water. They're able to adjust and just do less watering at one time and then take all the water from the field. Watering out the orchard. We're able to reduce that. You guys can workshop and manage. In general, California has a lot of work to do and with water management and being able to provide solutions for farmers in our state as well. Without farmers, so we begin to find a way to use water, and I think that California can take some steps in water management and build. There is there has been years in California where we had an oversupply and had water and then it's great big for us. We're on
Thanks, Jocelyn. And I know on farm, the fact that a well is working today does not guarantee that it's going to work tomorrow. I know we farm near the ocean, and with the drought in Southern California, we've had saltwater intrusion come in. We've had to shut down a couple of wells, and that gives you that kind of situation to if you have a plan B or not. If there's no plan B, you're in deep trouble very quickly, right? And so what is plan B and what is plan A these days as we go into the century? Netafim is a company that has been providing solutions for irrigation for the producers of many different crops for many years. I know that drip irrigation has been used on strawberries, for example, for over approaching 60 years that I'm aware of, well before Jocelyn was born. But at the time, those were big innovations coming into agriculture, and we recognize that there's more coming. And so, John, why don't you go ahead and give us an idea of what the future looks like? I just wanted to make that note.
First of all, thank you, AG, for moderating this panel. I know water has been on your radar for many years, and we have your operations with the water. I'm going to start out. Let's see here. There we go. See the next slide with the first. Today, I want to just recognize ladies and gentlemen together water in at a cup. And I think that it is very important to recognize it and the whole agriculture and managing water. 70% of Earth's fresh water goes to agriculture. Fresh water is available. It goes to agriculture. Not available. And so when you look at agriculture, I think it's time to look at agriculture as a solution rather than a problem. The solutions are out there. It's an opportunity. How do we come together collectively with the producers and ensure they're at the table along with the governmental leadership, NGOs, and business to address our climate challenges, along with the benefits of the needed benefits that agriculture brings. So if you go to the next slide, I'm going to be looking behind me to see which slide it is. So 2.3 billion people live in water-stressed areas. Okay. So a lot of times that means that food production is not necessarily available to them because of the rainfall. And even when they do have any kind of irrigation, they may not have the infrastructure or technology available to be efficient with their water use. There's not enough money to develop the infrastructure available to the water from 20. So I think it's important to recognize that the majority of the world gets their food with smallholder farmers, and the 2.3 billion people live in water stressed areas. Let's go to the next slide. Mentioned before, 7% of grocery water goes to agriculture. This year, 11% goes to municipal, and 19% goes to industrial. Okay, so what it means is, if you were just make a slight advance, then it's 70%. Right? I want to treat agriculture as a bank for water to use for other businesses. It's not what I'm doing. What I'm trying to say is, we need more productive with the land we have available. The partnership again with governments and communities and banks. The next slide. This slide should, okay, so that's getting bigger. This shows where our population is going to increase. And you'll see here, if you just look at kind of right here with Africa, Middle East, Asia, and right here in the United States. Take a line right there. And that's where a lot of the bubbles are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Take a snapshot of your brain about that. And go to the next slide real quick. You'll see here where the majority of water stress stations are. So, fast forward 20, 30, 40 years. Okay, so 2022 now, it's 2050. And we have a global population that lives right here. How are we going to grow the food that we need to, given the amount of water resources that we have? Early on, AG mentioned this, we have climate change affecting water in several ways. We make this from a quantity perspective, as well as quality perspective. Our drought rate is stronger and our rain is stronger. They're happening in different parts throughout the year. Before you may have a rain event that occurs for a month. But then during the growing season, are you going to use that water at all? No, it's lost. Okay, so the yearly average rainfall may be the same, but it depends on when that water falls and it's a bit of a two from the thing use infrastructure that's not exist. So we're really thinking how we're using our water across the world in order to meet the needs of the world population. So next slide. I love this slide. And then there's the FAO, you're watching this. I'd like to have it up there. So let's work on that. Okay, this goes from 1961 to 2008. Okay. So 1961 here, the green line here is clean tech agriculture, and the blue line is irrigated agriculture. Okay. And the overall amount is basically the amount of hectares that we have in agriculture production globally. So you'll see here, it's kind of gone up, gone down, not too good. Okay, since 2008, it has gone down. That's why we see something. But the story is also going to come. The black line here represents total population. Okay, and the total population is not of hectares per person that are available to us globally. Okay, so in 1961, we had almost 1.5 hectare just for our needs. Okay, that means that hectares per person, almost 0.5, between 0.45 and 0.5. That means for your food, your fuel, your fiber, your clothes, half a hectare. And 2008, that would cut in half. And let me tell you, 2008, now we want more of everything. We want to expand. We want a 2-day Amazon shipping for everyone. Or just the more we consume. We consume more food, we consume more clothes, we should consume. And so more and more pressure are being put on my friends here as farmers to be more productive with their land. And we're doing that with less land available, more regulation, and less resources available in order to produce significant. So the next slide. All right, for those of you who don't know drip irrigation, I'm not going to spend much time on this. This is a drip line here along with the actual drip itself. The water comes in, goes to a second set of filtration, and is stripped out at the roots on the soil or beneath the surface. As we say drip irrigation, that's essentially what it is. There are other forms of pressure irrigation, like thermopivot, There's land leveling with flood systems. Not here to promote one or the other, the companies that have been invented trip irrigation on the roads in other districts in 1965. And this is the technology and what the system. Okay, next one. All right, so let's look at the advancements. I'm going to start out with the Americas first, with American, a very global company. A lot of advancements overall in water management is coming out of the Americas, So the slide behind me here, I'm out of Jerry. They're from Silicon Valley. And here we have a flow pump and a feed area. So what we did, our partnership with the California government, the US government, conservation organizations, and the producer organization, develop a solution where we run the fluid filtration system, apply it to the crops in a uniform way to eliminate any need of artificial fertilizers, and the towels and the feed, let's go whole systems. Well, I just said available in that water can be looked at in different ways. They look at through fluid management, or we actually pump water through and fluid using fish and fertilizer. So we can look at very innovative. We do water from a quality perspective as well as water philosophy perspective. Let's ensure there is no filtration, groundwater reaching, flowing, and other systems flowing. So next slide. Okay, so next slide. This is a in-house operation of potatoes. And so we look at opportunities to increase our yield. And this is for a global consumer products manufacturer. So that a certain name would recognize it right away. They make soft drink as well as potato chips. And this is a split end. And they were looking to really, along with the farmer, that they purchased from, look at investing in ways that we can maximize the yields of the farmers over and responsible. So when we look at water management, we're actually looking at irrigation, we're looking at opportunities to go undercover as well. I look at controlling the environment and increasing the yield based on minimal and permanent costs. Okay, next slide. This is also a Mexico. And one of the things that as we look to do more or less, and we are looking at some of these more technologies, there may be more waste involved. So we're a plastic manufacturer. We're look at how we deal with plastic in life. And this is a recycling facility, which is a fully Mexico, where we collect our product at the life, 30% onto element, recycle, and 30% of content to our manufacturing facility. So we know that there are some effects with using more technology in water management. And responsibility, in my opinion, comes in mind in partnership with the growers, the producers, we're going to look at this holistically when it comes to sustainable water management. Next slide. And then outside the Americas real quick, number one, you get another scale this in the Americas. They're the next stop. This is a rice field mill. And outside of Dennis. And what we're doing there is we're actually irrigating right. It's irrigation. And more than cuts water into that, it cuts nutrients, fertilizer use by more than. And it really eliminates more than methane gas emissions from the arsenic. The skill behind me is actually the first ever carbon credit that's been issued due to irrigation, system irrigation, water management as a whole. So we look at global rice population, and we are looking at the amount of available population that relies on rice as a primary form of sustenance, which is 2/3. We have significant opportunities for water savings, and again, we're more productive with the land we have in front of us. And the last thing I'll say, is it's not just about the farming, it's not just about the farming statement. It's going to take a collaboration to achieve all the one is. That has run with the UN Global Compact. We are now joining the Water Resilience Coalition and Drive Private Industries to help growers achieve their water targets. I think it's important that we come together and work in a collaborative way to address all these water needs. So thanks again for joining us.
Great. Thanks, John. And I keep on saying that there's this excitement around what excitement around what intensification means. As we get new tools, as we get to have a chance to try them out in our fields, I think all farmers realize one thing, that they want to invest in more predictability in the outcome. And when they see something working that gives them a better result, they more than not will be willing to invest in that and embrace an entire new way of growing your crop. I know we went from being furrow irrigation to sprinklers. We looked over the fence and saw our neighbors using drip irrigation a long time ago, and we saw that they were kicking our butt. You know, they were just outproducing us, and we switched over and we did our trials. And sure enough, this idea of how we leapfrog in, and sometimes you miss an entire segment of agriculture because you've leapfrogged into a new dimension of technology, that's taking place. And that's why I think we want patience within the ag systems of our world. Is we recognize so much of the world right now is rain-fed agriculture, but all the things you could do with rain-fed agriculture, from breeding to leveling to all the things, these are all tools that are more and more available. The availability is more and more accessible, but in many places it's still inaccessible. And we're talking about that at this conference, is how quickly can the world step up and enter this 21st century with that toolbox ready to go. And one of the folks that has really demonstrated in his fields very innovative work in rain-fed crops and irrigated crops combined is Brad Doyle, and he's going to talk about how you might look at both the number one crop in the world, which is rice, and some of the great opportunities there, including the opportunities from the breeding side all the way to the production side. So, Brad.
Thank you. Let's see here. Let's be better here. So yes, I'm Brad Doyle. We operate a family-owned 4th generation farm in Northeast Arkansas. We're about 45 miles west of the Mississippi River and about 60 miles from Memphis, Tennessee, to give you an idea. We are considered the Mid-South. And just to FYI, about 96% of U.S. farms are family-owned and operated still. First slide, please. On our farm, we grow primarily soybeans, rice, and wheat. We're 100% irrigated, although we do not irrigate the wheat during season. But within my county and surrounding areas, we grow other crops such as cotton, corn, peanuts, sweet potatoes, and then grass for either sod or for hay. Next slide, please. Historically, the major water delivery system was flood irrigation, both for rice and a temporary flood for other crops, soybeans, corn, cotton. And we would actually pull levees up and gravitationally feed the water downhill. Multiple inlet is an adoption method, which incorporates polypipe, which would also be known as lay flats. White pipe usually comes in a 1/4 mile or 1/2 mile roll, and we roll it out, and then we, as I'll get into, talk a little bit more about how we determine what size holes to pop and how many row or furrow irrigation. So we're watering down the rows versus the flood type irrigation, and we do that primarily on all the row crops. We pull up a slight bed and we water channels, about the size of a garden hose. You'd see we're running down the row. Much less surface evaporation occurs during that. It does rely on wicking of the soil into the plant root area. A new method of intermittent wetting and drying on rice is popular, and it has started. I saw a figure this morning, is reduced methane emissions by 63% on rice. And then the most common around outside of our area, because we're extremely flat, if you have any sort of topography, overhead center pivot irrigation is common. Next slide, please. Where does our water come from? In our area, we're number 2 user of groundwater in the United States. California's number 1. We have almost 1.4 million acres of rice every year. We have about 3.5 million acres of soybeans. We have between 600,000-700,000 acres of cotton and corn each. And a lot of that is irrigated. We also use water in our area. We have access water rights. So if a ditch or stream or a canal runs nearby your farm, you can drop in there and pull that water out with what we call a relift. A lot of those are portable, PTO tractor driven, or you can have a stationary. So you can reuse that water over and over if it is in abundance next to you. Surface water reservoir, which is our primary method of irrigation. We have in 1985, my father-in-law took 100 acres out of production, lowest part of the farm, and it did contain some trees back then. Now they're just stumps, but it's a 100-acre lake on the farm. It was in cooperation with the USDA EQIP program. So fast forward to 2020, my wife and her brothers applied for and received a grant for another 50 acres on the farm. So now we have 150 total acres of surface water capacity, and it is in conjunction with a tailwater recovery system. So what does that mean? We can irrigate on the farm. We can capture rainfall on the farm. Any excess water we have the choice if it leaves the farm or not. If we're at full capacity, we can release it off the farm. If not, we can pump it back into that reservoir. And we do that in the wintertime, primarily in the off season when we have nearly 50 inches of rain in Arkansas. So there's a lot of flooding that goes on. And I'll get into a little bit about the benefits of that. Next slide, please. So this is just a photo of soybeans, and it is bedded up every 60 to 70 inches, depending on your preference. And that is imagine this is the top side of the field, and that is two runs of the lay flat pipe. And the reason we do that is to keep the water pressure high enough. And then we will actually just punch a hole in that pipe and run that stream downhill. So it's going to run between, and here we're watering every other row. If you want to, you can water every row, but we see that it works for us this way. The second line on the right side would feed further down the field. So when we lose water pressure, we can water half a set at a time, or there's multiple different means of it. Next slide, please. So the benefits of this type of irrigation versus the flood irrigation is we use less water. It's just simply put, we don't have to pump that field to a full capacity and get that head of water moving downhill. We can simply use this water as needed, when needed, with almost zero runoff anymore. A lot of that has to do with a program I'll talk about in a minute, but reducing plant stress, that is important, right? If you're trying to maintain yield, profitability on a farm, you need that instant turgor pressure rebound from the plant, or else it's going to suffer yield loss. So the irrigation, although we could grow crops without irrigation in our area, we have a hard pan soil, which allows water to hold. And thus they found in 1906 in my area that rice was a great fit. So yeah, I'm in a band in the #1 rice producing county in America. It's about 130,000 acres of rice in my area, and it's rotated with other crops. But having water availability on the farm is critical for growing rice. We would find something else to grow if we did not have that access. We actually have computer programs now developed by industry and university partners that formulate the size hole and how many holes you need in a length of run of irrigation pipe. And it's calculated off the output of the well, the length of fall that it's going to take to irrigate that field. And we can to the hour turn an irrigation well on or off because, and get 90-95% irrigation with very little. And in the past, it was a guesswork, or you had water, all the water, when it made it to the bottom, you knew you were fully watered. Well, then you pulled the boards and you released all that excess, and there was a lot of it. So this is a high efficiency method of irrigation now, reducing either electric, diesel, or natural gas fuel for those pumping systems. because we don't have that full sheet of water as a flood, we have a lot less evaporation. So that will be another form of water savings. And it takes a little time to roll the pipe out. And then with the first irrigation to go along and pop the holes, after that, it's merely turning on or off the well or maybe changing a valve in a pipe. But it's flood irrigating of soybeans or corn temporarily. It's highly labor intensive, and you have to babysit it through the night. My son, unfortunately, is the one who gets that job, and he does a wonderful job. But it's very labor intensive to flood irrigate that method. Rice farming too, it's a daily chore. Go around multiple times a day, check your water, because we're using temporary earthen dams, and they can blow out from water. So it's a lot of labor involved with that. Next slide, please. Just another angle of looking at the water. Full water pressure. We usually run about 14-inch underground irrigation pumps. Our water table is around 150 to 180 feet. And we start, as you can see, those plants aren't very tall. We can actually water soybeans, corn, rice, or soybeans, corn, and cotton shorter this method versus flood irrigation. It's also a great method of getting water off the field. As Jerry mentioned earlier, too much water is just as strenuous or stressful for the plant. So this also serves dual purpose, getting water off when there's too much, and then also delivering the water. Next slide, please. Disadvantages of that type of irrigation really are just the added cost of the poly pipe. It is recyclable. It's not reusable. So the companies will come pick it up and then they do their thing. It would be great if you could just roll it up and reuse it, but it would be very hard to exactly place it where it was the next year. And then the temporary labor involved with that installation. Next slide, please. So this is where we get into the real difference of our water source, where our water comes from. And most of the farmers in our area still rely on groundwater. And it may be because a 40 or 80 or 100 acre field is isolated and they don't have a large enough block. When we talk about the surface water reservoirs that I'll mention here in a minute, most of those are done on larger blocks of land. I would say 400 acres or larger would be, you have to take out a percentage, 5 to 10% of that land in order to build those. But it has a lower cost of pumping. Just simply put, you're relifting water maybe at 20 feet versus 180 plus. So it's just the physics of how pumps work. That would be one way. We use a lot of underground pipe. So from our reservoir, we can irrigate different fields through the underground maze of valves and riser pipes as we have. It's a warmer water. You don't really think about it, but the water we pull out of the ground, I think, is around 52 degrees. And then you can see it really in the rice. We get that cold water stress. Where we're using surface water, it's warmer and there's no stress at all from that. It's definitely a year like this year, we feel like we've dropped our water table 3 to 4 feet. Our irrigation companies that maintain, put them in, they monitor that pretty heavily. We had to redig a well this year at 90 feet. The table was at 90, our well was at 90. So it was just time to go a little deeper. It hadn't been updated in probably 40 years. There's always maintenance with moving parts and machinery like that. It's environmentally responsible because of that. If you build a reservoir, but any size, shape, or form, you can actually pull water from all different points. Whereas a ground well, you have one single point. You're pulling it from one place. So that is in our reservoir, we pull out from 2 different directions, and we can split the farm. We can irrigate more acres at a time using that. This also allows us to, and we really don't have that much runoff at all because we're extremely flat to begin with. We're not like Ray up in Iowa, who has a lot more topography. We just don't see that. So historically, a lot of our fields have a short raised road around them. A lot of it has to do with the maintenance of the rice fields. and farms. And so that we can contain a lot of that. The waterfowl and the wildlife and the fish that use our reservoir, it's amazing. So that was just a side benefit that you don't even think about, but it is a huge attraction for migrating waterfowl. When all the fields are dry and you're harvesting, they have water there to use that. And then during the wintertime, we have so much of that abundant excess water. If you don't capture it, pull it in and use it, save it for later, then it's gone. And we do drain into the Mississippi River, so we're very aware of how much flows through our area. Next slide, please. This is a picture of our original reservoir. It's 100 acres. You're looking at the low end where we have the valve systems that we can gravitationally release it into our canals and then deliver that through the pumps anywhere on the farm. Next slide, please. Disadvantages, you have to take out farmland. You're displacing some farmland. In our case, we chose the lowest, most unproductive. And back then in the mid 80s, part of that could have been considered wetland. There's rules now that you're really taking out farming land. So it is a sacrifice you have to consider if you're going to build one of those. And the expenses have gotten higher. On the EQIP project, it is a cost share program, but just in the last 2 years, it's doubled. So the dirt work that has to be done, the diesel fuel that has to work, the pumps, the pipe, all of that, you're not getting as big a project as you once were, and it is what it is. So just be aware of that. But it's long-term, lifetime of your operation investment there, and you do have to, like I said, keep the upkeep and the maintenance of that. Next slide, please. So technology, we'll talk a little bit about technology. It has come a long way in a short period of time. So soil moisture sensors, as Jocelyn mentioned, we use those as well to monitor how well we're irrigating or when we need to trigger an irrigation. You know, after a rainfall, everything sets back to zero. Our soil moisture sensors start triggering when we need to catch back up. Weather station, we have a weather station on our farm. We're measuring rainfall, wind speed, and those, we use this for so many things, but having a local weather station, you get more accurate information that way. Flashboard risers we use on the bottom end of our fields. We can actually back up water or catch water for the purpose of reusing it later. So a lot of that is done in the riser, in every rice field for sure in the bottom end, and we're using that as a dam, so to speak. Pipe planner software, as mentioned earlier, tells us how long, how many hours, what size hole we can use on that lay flat pipe. The multiple or side inlet irrigation, we're actually using that lay flat pipe in rice fields, and we're running it downhill, and we can actually pop holes in each paddy versus just the top side working it downhill. And it's a much more efficient way of irrigating a field, recharging the water in the rice field. Precision leveling is done. There's a lot of that. Precision leveling where we go out, we grade it with high horsepower dirt moving tractors, and you think it's flat, we make it flatter. But in the long term, it really saves water in the drainage of the farm. GPS is probably one of the most substantial technology changes, where we used to survey the levees with the transit levels, and then that went to laser. The GPS technology is outstanding. We can precisely place our levees, our drainage, our planting, any kind of pass we make across the field anymore with accurate precision, and that saves a lot of diesel as well. Drones are becoming more popular. So drone monitoring of water. You can fly fields now at a central location and see exactly how well you've watered, or if you're after a rainfall, you're holding too much water, you need to go out there, get that water off so that plant will recover without any damage. And then also the fertility and yield mapping. Every time we go across the field, we're collecting data. And that helps us in the long run to be more efficient, use less seed, use less fertilizer, less pesticides as needed, but watering will also be included in that technology. Next slide, please. So this is just a weather station, solar powered. They interconnected with our different locations on the farm, an app on our phone. You know, we can be anywhere and see what's going on the farm. Next slide, please. This would be excess water. So this is off season. The crop is harvested and we have a ton, I'll say a ton. We have a lot of that water. It just flows off. It goes away. We see this. Now the ducks and geese, waterfowl, they love this. And a lot of the hunters, you know, they'll take advantage of that. But that's when we have the opportunity to capture that and store it for in crop season. Next slide, please. That's all I've got. Just a little bit about Arkansas and what we do on our farm. So thank you for having me. Appreciate the opportunity.
Great. Thank you, Brad. And I think when we talk about the diversity of crops grown, whether it's in our country, whether it's in Central America, whether it's in the rest of the world, that we're being introduced to new crops all the time, new crops that we can eat. We talk about your consumption patterns. Suddenly you're eating everything from pomegranates to Brussels sprouts, and not just doubling up your consumption because you never ate them before. Now all of a sudden your consumption skyrockets, and we're being introduced to a whole new cuisine globally for those of access to food. Now, for those that don't have access to food or to nutritionally dense products, that's a lot of what this conference is all about as well. Is unpredictable weather means unpredictable harvest. How are we going to create more predictability with that capacity to grow food for a planet, and then have the will and the imagination to get it to the people all the time, in time? That diversity of product then also then comes back to this. What's possible, whether you're growing in the desert, which we have in California, up in the foothills, whether you're growing across the Great Plains, this idea of how much land is available to grow, that depends on a lot of things. When you look at Africa, for example, with 90% of the agriculture there, depending on the rain that falls or the amount of rain, too much or not enough. In the Midwest, I think we're still at 80% in the United States of rain-fed agriculture. In places like California, where the bulk of the irrigated crops, which drive the value of our agricultural system, is irrigated crops where you turn the water on and off depending on what you need. And we recognize those different kinds of opportunities to have new technology placed in your fields is going to drive a lot of what happens in these years ahead. And then we didn't even talk about breeding opportunities, whether it's nitrogen fixing crops like nitrogen fixing corn, cotton, not nitrogen fixing wheat. It's amazing how those products are coming to the market very soon. And with that, you mentioned going from transit, trying to level a field in the old days with horses, and then with the first tractors, and then we are using more complicated equipments, and you went to lasers. And now the lasers are obsolete because you're using a satellite system to drive your systems. We all know people that are in their 90s. All of us know someone that's in their 90s, most of us do. And in that 100-year period, that's how fast agriculture is moving. 100 years ago, most of those farmers in all regions of the world were using horses to plow their fields and to cultivate their fields. 100 years later, here we are talking about actually growing food on Mars, I guess. Is that the next place where we can expand our operations? And this idea that we're moving forward very quickly, that's where we keep on saying we need patience in the agricultural systems to allow people to catch up and get into this 21st century. I'm going to ask the question, what are your biggest challenges on farm to Jocelyn and Brad? And then we're also going to talk to John about what are some of the greatest solutions you see coming out of your arena for those farmers. So Jocelyn, what are some of your greatest challenges?
Thank you. So we face obviously water challenges, which I mentioned a little bit previously in my introduction. We are working through, as I said, the SWEEP grant with those. We have a lot of technology uses as well. We use soil moisture meters in all of our orchards. We have probes at 3, 6, 9, and 12 feet so that we're able to accurately know when we're supposed to water. And in addition to that, we also use what's called a pressure bomb. It comes in a big briefcase, and what you do is you take leaf samples. It's recommended in the highest heat point of the day, and you use that pressure chamber to see what the water stress is on the leaf, and you're able to accurately see when your trees actually need water. But in addition to just the climate struggles, which we are seeing and the changes, as I said, we have to constantly adapt. We have a lot of regulation in California and in the United States in general. And that's definitely something that has been a challenge for farmers. For example, in California, the SGMA, it's the Sustainability Groundwater Act that we've been working on for the past several years, is working to recharge areas of groundwater. But with that, it has put a lot of pressure on farmers, as we're going to now have to be paying fees at acres per feet that we use with water that we pump for every well that we use, regardless of whether it's an irrigation district or an own private well. And so working with agencies in order to make this the best possible outcome for farmers is something that, we have to remember and be able to work on. Thankfully, with my dad, we're able to be really involved in this process and work with agencies and other programs within our state that have a lot of input in what goes on. But those are some big challenges that we face on our farm in particular, and climate and water throughout the state has been something that we have had to change farming practices to be able to continue farming how we are now.
So I would say, yeah, the water availability. So depending on where you're located, your underground network of an aquifer possibly being recharged from a larger river, that's very important for where you farm. I'm shut off from the Mississippi River, so we rely on surface water more. Challenges that we've seen from potential climate change is spring rains delaying planting. So I think that has been critical for us to plant in shorter windows. So farmers are very they have an ability to adapt. So why do we plant or use bigger equipment? Because we have a shorter window that we need to get it into. Labor issues are also driving our problems on the farm. Farmers need to be more efficient in everything they do. There's only so much time in a day, so many hours of sunlight or daylight, and we try to be the most efficient in that short window of time. So that would be the issues that we're dealing with primarily.
I'm gonna get that.
Repeat your question real quick. I'm sorry.
New innovations are coming out of your.
Okay, new innovations. Okay, so I'm going to take a step back here and really think about some of the new innovations coming out of the Americas through conversations we've had with producers. I think I made that point before, but I want to reiterate that really listening to the farmers, how they're using their lands and where their pain points are, because my company can innovate just for the sake of innovating. Right? We can make whatever, but unless it's usable for the farmer that addresses the needs they want, our innovation would be for naught. It would just not be used. And I think it's important to bring this conversation we're having right now with those folks that are involved in agriculture, but are not agriculture producers. So the NGOs, the corporate entities, the environmental groups, the government, everyone is concerned about this. Everyone is concerned with making sure we have enough food available for the future with less environmental impact as possible. So it's really driving innovation. I'll use an example. In Brazil, it's been historically throughout the world that different technologies of irrigation didn't really play well with one another. We're competitors. So drip irrigation didn't work with center pivot irrigation. We didn't work with flood systems. It just wasn't really a thing. But after listening to the farmers in Brazil, we came together with another center pivot manufacturer to provide an integrated solution for their land where some areas of the field have a center pivot and some areas of the fields have drip, but it's all managed together. And I think it's those type of collaborative efforts that we have that are going to really help out the producers in the future by listening to them. There are opportunities, again, in Brazil, looking at coffee, where we can be more productive with the land that's rain-fed right now. And if we're more productive with them through any kind of integrated water management or pressurized irrigation, we can alleviate the need to have deforestation down there because we are doubling our yield through water management. We mentioned global irrigation. There's only 20% of agricultural land globally that's irrigated. 20%, that's it. We account for 40% of production, though. 40% of our global food comes from irrigated agriculture, from only 20% of the land. And like I said, land is decreasing. So, I mean, I appreciate everything we've talked about: soil moisture sensors. We have a digital farming platform coming out this year. We have, we talk about drones and satellite uses. We have to start simple, baby steps with a lot of producers. Not everyone as advanced as you are, Brad, and as you are, Jocelyn, right? We got to start simple, building out that infrastructure on these farms and really teaching them how to manage water. And the technology adoption will come after that, in my opinion.
And it's that kind of resilience, I think, that we see starting to build in watershed after watershed. I think the idea of public-private partnerships that can be put into place. An easy example is I farm down in Southern California, which is an absolute desert. We get 14 inches of rain a year. You get 50 inches of rain. You get 20, 24 inches of rain a year. But with 14 inches of rain, you would know that I farm in a desert area. But I've been using reclaimed water for the last 30 something years. And that being ability to take wastewater and clean it up is now being combined with being able to harvest water from the atmosphere, being able to take brackish water and pull the minerals out and turn that into fertilizers, but having water as the byproduct. What we can do with water, obviously desal of the oceans, water is becoming more accessible with both used water, new water, recycled water, and this idea that we just have to implement where it's practical these different technologies and become water independent, if you will, region by region, watershed by watershed. I have great interest in the forests, for example, the headwaters of the Colorado River. Well, why would that be when I'm down in Southern California near Disneyland? It's because I depend on that water coming out of that watershed. And so we're doing some great work, Solutions from the Land, working with many partners in trying to figure out how can we restore and reforest and improve the health of some of these broken forests. In California, we have broken forests in the Sierras all the way up to through Oregon and Washington. These catastrophic fires are obviously one of the worst things that are happening on the planet. And yet we recognize that if we start working, not thinking about it, but just putting into play proof of concept, concepts, we always like to say, let's stop doing the think tank. Let's start doing the do tank on this planet. And I think that's what this conference is all about. No more think tank. Fine to do research. We need research, but we need to move towards a do tank to implement some of the best solutions that are available and that we know can work differently in different places with different commodities and different needs with different resources. And you start to see that there is a solution out there, and there is actually a glass very full, if you will, not half empty. So I'd like to say on behalf of Solutions from the Land, all of our panelists here, and give a huge thanks to Aika Lloyd-Day here, who we've known for many, many years as a great supporter of all agriculture in the Americas, and to Aika and the staff to put this together. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be here today, to participate in this conference that for the first time, it was Water Day, but also for the first time, there was an Ag Day just on Saturday. And so any questions from the audience here? We'd love to have that.
Lloyd. Yeah, Kudilis Ika. And we understand the need to look for more efficient ways of utilizing water, also finding alternative sources, to ensure that the cultivated land can continue. My argument is, isn't that kicking the can down the road, in the sense that from a land classification standpoint, we see that we're trying to grow everything, everybody trying to grow everything within the same local. Isn't it time, as a preemptive action, we look to a reclassification of land capability using water as the main parameter, rather than awaiting that we arrive at a crisis to force our hand as to what is grown where? Should we regulate what is grown where now as a preemptive action?
if I may, I'd love to just respond to that. From one point of view is there's no one solution set for the challenges for us with water. I think many of us like to believe that if we start to look at our world from a watershed view, each region on the planet, you can easily classify by watershed, not by political lines, not by border lines, but by watershed. And if we start working in a watershed mentality with the thought of taking energy, water, and food, and not letting them being split off, but pulled together so that each region has the potential to be independent in their water, independent in their food, independent with their energy, based on the systems that are available to us now and are coming very quickly. I think I like the thought that why wouldn't we move in that direction so that like an animal with many cells, one area might have a little problem, but the rest of the system is healthy, so that when we have inconsistencies, which we know is predictable, we're a little bit more resilient because we have abundance creation as the basis of what we're trying to accomplish. So the thought of limiting production in an area when that production could be enormous for anything. I live in the desert down there in California, and when you add water, it's amazing what you could produce in those months where it's not 120 degrees, right? But now you have a lot of stuff going indoors too. And so who cares what temperature it is, hot or cold, if you're inside? You're never going to feed the world from a greenhouse or a hothouse, or you're not going to feed the world from a rooftop. But those are part of the augmentation to the global food supply that help us create abundance so there's more choices. And I think that's the direction we're going. But John?
I really appreciate that question. And I'm going to just start off by saying that I appreciate that water management and the way water flows is by watershed, which transcends political boundaries. However, water is managed by political boundaries. That's why I think we had a conversation this week about overused cliches about, waters for fighting, whiskeys for drinking. That is completely over cliched because war started over water has been going on for centuries, millennia, even over water. And so when we look at how governments allocate water, there are some governments throughout the world that allocate water as if it is infinite and without even taking into consideration how it is used. And therefore we are in trouble because there's not enough water for water use for sanitation and health, what we call WASH, water access, sanitation, and health. Next March in New York, there's a United Nations Conference on Water. First one since 1977. I, on behalf of my company, has been heavily involved in the planning process from the stakeholder side. And while I really appreciate all of the work being done in developing this conference, my points that I continue to make is that we need to make sure agriculture is at the table, because these are the conversations they're having. They're having these conversations of how do we make water more available for sanitation and health. And again, what I don't want to happen is water or agriculture to be the water bank for other uses. We really need to look at what crops are grown for what markets in what areas, managed by the political boundaries, because they have to. Otherwise, unless you have some sort of partnership among that transcends political boundaries, and it's managed in a responsible way. We talked a lot about on-farm management today because that is our expertise. Our expertise is how to manage water efficiently on-farm. There's a much larger story to this. It has to do with politics. It has to do with infrastructure. Water loss in infrastructure is huge. Making sure the water can get to the farm and what happens afterwards, right? We are a piece of the pie. We're a big piece of the pie that results in yield, but that all needs to be part of the discussion. So I encourage everybody to get involved in this water conference in March at the UN. While it doesn't have a mandate coming out of it, there's going to be a lot of talk about the future of water and the future of United Nations when it comes to water management.
Just as a farmer, I would say with, government agencies and stuff like that, work with us, not against us. We're here because we farm this land for generations and we're willing to do what it takes to be able to create solutions. But if, farmers aren't at the table and we're not able to be part of that, then it's a little bit hard to finish it. There's so much diversity in ag as we've talked about. So there's not a one size fits all solution to everybody when it comes to water. So we really need to be able to have that opportunity to give the input and figure out by watershed district or region by region, how we're going to fix this problem and what we're going to do, and then take action and not just keep talking about it.
Just another comment. The US agricultural land available is going down. Other countries are going up. So we're actually losing land. A lot of that is to infrastructure, malls and housing and industry. So we're actually, our yields are going up. So we're more efficient on the farm at producing a crop, whatever crop, bringing in breeding and genetics. That's another whole story that helps us do that. So innovation, but yeah, we're doing more with less.
And so let me finish by saying this idea of the quote, although it's not sure if it was Mark Twain, that waters for drinking and waters for fighting and whiskey is for drinking. It's interesting. Mark Twain does have a quote that I like, and his quote is very simple. You can't trust your judgment if your imagination is out of focus. And our imagination in this 21st century has to change. We need to leave the 21st century behind, if you will, those dark ages that we can recognize as dark ages of just tremendous struggle to get to the year 2022. And this idea of an agricultural renaissance is basically what our group embraces, because we can see it. We can recognize 100 years ago where we were. It's 2022 today, and there's just nothing more exciting than to see how many new solutions there are in the area of water, in the area of life science, in the area of mechanical harvest, automation, satellite technologies. This the whole alignment, if you will, of the sciences coming together at a time when we must create abundance. That's what drives us right now, and that's what I think we can embrace and say there is hope, but we have to be working here and understand some of those old structures that we've just allowed to be in place need to change with the times. And we all recognize that the pressures with 8 billion people on the planet and more, and variable weather makes it more important for us to recognize that let's adapt, let's evolve, and let's more importantly move forward. Thank you all for your attention today and for the opportunity. Lloyd, again, I'll hand it back to you.
Sure. Thank you, AG, and to all of you for this great panel. It's great to have farmers here and technology providers. That this is such a big difference than what we're hearing next door. For those on camera or who are listening virtually, and I know that the Mexico's ambassador to the FAO is watching and he's texting me. So saludos, Embajador Garcia. But I think what's pivotal here is that you're here. That farmers are here talking about agriculture as a solution, talking about innovations, talking about science, talking about new technology that is going to help us feed the world. All the chants and everything that's going on around us isn't going to help feed the world. What you guys are doing is going to help feed the world, and it's making agriculture part of the solution. So thank you very much for your time, and have a good afternoon.